Hey everyone. Wow, what a 24 hours it's been, as I'm sure pretty much everyone coming up to the stage has both said and is going to say today. We're going to be talking about something slightly different to what's been discussed so far. We're going to be talking about the wonderful world of gaming, in particular how Web3 gaming is going to, at least in our minds, revolutionize the gaming industry. We've got some excellent panelists here that I've got the pleasure to talk alongside. We've got Yatsu, who is the co-founder and chairman over at Animoca. For any of you that aren't familiar with Animoca, they are investors but also operators, 380 active investments, and most notably, owners of the Sandbox. They've invested in a whole host of amazing projects like OpenSea, Dapper Labs, Axie Infinity, etc. We've got Sebastien Borget. He is the COO and co-founder over at the Sandbox. The Sandbox is kind of one of the leaders in the open metaverse right now at the platform level. They have over 4 million users with wallets inside their platform, 22,000 unique landowners as well. And then last but not least, of course, Jamie Burke, the founder and CEO at Outlier Ventures. They're the #1 by volume Web3 accelerator and the top 3 kind of Web3 investors globally. And myself, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer over at Decentral Games. We are a GameFi project. We're built inside Decentraland, account for around about 60% of all of Decentraland traffic today, which, despite popular belief, is more than 38 users. So what I thought we would kind of just begin with and set the scene before we get into some questions is just a few stats around the Web3 gaming space today for any of you that aren't as familiar with Web3 gaming. So in August of 2022, what we saw, according to DappRadar at least, around 850,000 Web3 gaming unique active wallets were observed. That's slightly down from near the end of last year where we had this enormous kind of bull cycle, and what was born out of that, I think, was what has been referred to as like play and earn or play to earn, whichever stage in the cycle you've been at. $4.2 billion, which I think is an incredible statistic, which is the total trading volume, all-time NFT sales volume of Axie Infinity, which is not only the largest of any gaming project, but any NFT project of all time. And that's across 2.2 million individual traders. Then when we kind of take a little look at, okay, the current gaming space today, there was an excellent study that was recently published at the end of July from Coda, and they did a sample of around about 7,000 traditional gamers. And in that, what they found was that 52% of those surveyed were not familiar with any kind of Web3 terminology, and only 3% of those gamers actually had ever owned an NFT. So while we have started to see some really great traction already in like the Web3 space, it's fair to say, to not overuse a cliche, we're still early. And I thought I would kick things off by addressing the elephant in the room, the FTX situation, which I think has been well covered so far. But I'll kind of put to the rest of the panel, do you think this impacts the gaming space? What are the implications outside of just kind of within the DeFi and CeFi space right now? Yad, I'll put this to you to begin with, to kick us off.
Right, so thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. So the first thing I would just want to add on your statistic, that there's a lot more that are sort of going into the Web3 gaming space where they actually have custodial wallets. And so that is not captured by DappRadar. So for instance, in one case, one of our portfolio companies, Gamey, has over 2.2 million wallets, for instance, but because it's custodial, it's not actually seen in the platforms. And most of the onboarding that will happen basically from, let's call it the traditional gamers to the Web3 gamers, are probably going to happen in this manner in the first phase, because they're not comfortable with setting up MetaMask, they don't understand how that goes. So there's that aspect, and obviously DappRadar doesn't cover it. So the numbers are actually a little greater than what it is, but but back to the cliche, we are still early. In terms of macro, I mean, obviously what's happened in the last 24 hours is nothing short of incredible. Yep. But I think, again, the measure, and this is the same thing when people talk about, oh, there's so few people who are active in blockchain games or in NFT trading, for instance. The majority of people today actually use the NFTs for utility. right? In the same way that you don't buy a car or buy a pair of shoes to sell tomorrow. But last year, a lot of the activity was more speculative. Today, if you look at it, typically 5 or maybe less than 10% of the collections are actually up for trade and sale, right? And you can't measure the health of an entire industry based exactly what's happening in Wall Street, right?
Right.
But that's kind of a little bit how the original crypto people will look at it, because that's the measure of what they look at. Now, gaming macro, it's still a growing industry. In fact, it's a $200+ billion industry as a whole. Has nothing to do with crypto, has nothing to do with what's happening, with FTX and Binance and everything else. That's the fundamental. It's bigger than music. It's bigger than music and film combined as an industry. Typically in recession, gaming always increases in terms of activity, right? And so that's really the pie that Web3 gaming is about, which is, it will accelerate and grow because of property rights, but as a base, you still have, $200 billion as an industry to tap into. And maybe we can talk later about the value shift, because what Web3 really does is transfer that $200 billion of value into the communities more so than into the central platforms like Apple, Google, and advertising networks. Mm-hmm. And that's the real value shift.
So how do we think this is going to impact things like consumer confidence? Jamie, Seb, I'll put to either of you to think about this in the context of FTX as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to labor the point, but obviously everyone thinks about what's happening now with FTX in the context of contagion and liquidity and how that kind of cascades down, and we're going to see how that plays out. It's not going to be pretty. But actually, it's contagion from a reputational perspective as well. So there is already a lot of skepticism within gaming generally, either from gamers or gaming studios or whatever it may be. And this doesn't help that, right? It kind of feeds into that narrative that somehow this is all just about the worst attributes of Wall Street. Now, we know that's not true, but it's not helpful. So I think that's a fact. But again, as Yat said, why should what's going on in the wider kind of secondary market for crypto affect gaming if really what we're talking about is gaming and the evolution of gaming? And the answer is it shouldn't. These guys are probably better versed than me to say what happens in a global recession with gaming. They're bullish on that outcome as a digital consumable. I'm inclined to believe them. What I would say is that I would imagine if you are going to be spending more or at least the same on digital consumption in a recession, you're probably going to be looking for value. And so where previously you might have been okay with pure consumption, now actually the idea that you might be able to retain some value and potentially grow value might become more appealing, but we'll see.
Great. Well, let's dig a bit into the adoption piece, and because we're talking a lot here about how is this going to impact consumer confidence, like the total scale that we can reach within the regular traditional gaming space. There's quite a chasm to cross still today for us to truly reach the kind of scale of the traditional gaming space. What do you see, and I'll put this to you initially, Sebastien, first. What do you see as some of the biggest adoption hurdles that we face in targeting these kind of non-crypto native individuals, these gamers, and bringing them in? And how do we begin solving some of those in the short to medium term?
So, well, I think it's a good segue here, and I beg to differ a little bit. From the consumer perspective, they don't really look at what the market is doing and price and so on. They just look at what is a fun game I can engage with, and whether there is now an added benefit of true digital ownership, so I can grow and keep the value and potentially sell my asset, which I couldn't do before. And what we're seeing is basically you need to have a great fun product to engage. That's always the entry point. You need to develop gameplay into those products that will retain the users, and you need to have a good reason to drive the users in initially. So that's what we've been doing essentially with Sandbox by bringing over 400 brands already, and having just closed the Alpha Season 3, which has been our most successful event to date. We've had the best engagement metric ever, even during pre-FTX, but also during all the so-called crypto winter. We see people like to come, to stay over an hour, half an hour to an hour into all those experiences, to explore a different kind of gameplay. And I want to also touch down about We're talking about gaming industry, but more specifically in our case, the metaverse goes much beyond gaming. It touches like all form of entertainment, into music, into fashion, into like virtual shows, virtual concerts, arts, and so on. So it's even appealed to a broader audience. And what the metaverse and Sandbox has the capability to is to attract audience beyond the existing market of gamer to grow that overall market that Yad described as a $200 billion to reach its next phase. And in a market which is in a recession, people like are looking for like different ways to entertain themselves if they cannot like spend any more on traveling and so on. And virtual world with an avatar is a great way to connect with others, to have various activities. And it's even better if like their activities can generate rewards, NFTs, that are actually assets they can own, sell, transfer. So overall, I'm very confident that the gaming industry and the metaverse in general will be very resilient or even like keep growing in the current market condition, as long as we keep providing very entertaining experience, which we do by bringing all those brands in fashion, in gaming. Yeah. We open Gucci, we open Kun Agüero, a football player. We had Warner Music, one of the most popular experience. Walking Dead, Care Bear, Smurf. All of those are actually appealing to users who are not familiar with Web3 technology or tokens, and yet are stepping in for the value add of like social interaction and fun.
Well, I'll dig in, and I'll come to you in a second, yeah, because I want to just touch in a little bit that you mentioned there, because I think a common kind of, I guess, mainstream news criticism, and I think that there is a lot of importance to this, is, you know, there is a general kind of aversion from the traditional gaming community to NFTs and pieces like this. So how do we...
Maybe I can jump on that. Like, I'm the president of the Blockchain Game Alliance as well. It's been close to 3 years that our mission is to show like how blockchain technology can benefit the video game industry. Sorry, Jamie, but I beg to differ. Like, there's on one side a certain optic from the press that tend to say like the video game industry and the players don't like NFT. That's not at all what I see every time I go into a gaming conference. Like, the number of members from the BGA has grown to 450, while it was maybe 200 earlier this year. More and more developers are looking at the technology because they want to get away from the control of certain distribution platform and empower their community and create collectively with them, share the value with them, and develop new gameplays thanks to that technology. So I think overall, we have to separate what press tend to say, because like it's a good clickbait on the title, and the reality of the market and people getting to play with like fun experience, a token, and develop.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to get your take.
I want to push on that, right? Because look, as you know, I'm part of the Blockchain Gaming Alliance, big advocate for the space. But I do think we need to accept that there is a big job to do, and I know you're aware of that, right? So I think the reality is not necessarily specific to gaming, but there is a significant part of the global population that is resistant to crypto and Web3 at all, right? And therefore, its introduction into gaming is seen as some kind of corruption of gaming soul. We know that's not true. We know that when it's framed in the right way, things like digital property rights can be understood. And of course, you know, we occasionally lose control of the narrative. But there are pushbacks. You see with Discord, you see with Steam. You know, there are significant pushbacks from users, and I don't think we can pretend that's not there. It is significant.
What would you have to say on that? Yeah.
So first of all, while it's true that certain communities are against NFTs, it's generally a Western narrative, and that's really important to understand. So the US game publishers, for instance, like EA, Activision, whatever, before were really interested in it, and now are full-scale retreat on NFTs because their audiences don't like it. But that has more to do with what Americans, for instance, think about gaming than what happens in Asia. And I think this has to do with the macro feeling around crypto generally. Things like what happened with FTX isn't helpful, but it comes down to this whole thing that, you know, like for instance, youth in America is now generally more socialist-leaning than capitalist, for instance. That was something that a decade ago would have been unthinkable, for instance, right? So this is just the trend. You know, I say this sometimes, but you know, the American dream is alive and well in Asia, right? You know, people in Vietnam and in Philippines and in Korea and in wherever are sort of, you know, building for businesses, have hope, have opportunity. You know, they believe capitalism works for them. that they've seen for the last 20, 30 years that capitalism has given them benefits. Democracy is relatively young in these places. Capitalism and property rights is a phenomenon that has brought broadly wealth, even if there's inequity, whereas in America it's not the case. So which is why, for instance, in Japan, the Prime Minister, Kishida-san, has made Web3 and the metaverse national agenda, for instance, right? Hong Kong has most recently come out and basically said not only virtual asset policy allowing for retail activity, but also fully embracing NFTs, where the Treasury Minister comes out in a punk shirt, right? I mean, so it's a completely different narrative. But from a Western perspective, you don't see it. But actually, if you're in Asia, which is the majority of the gaming population, right? You can see basically that it's driving that sort of growth. And so I think that in the interim, as we've seen with free-to-play gaming, we'll see more adoption coming from Asia. But then, of course, we can never count out the US, right? I mean, they're not necessarily the innovators in free-to-play, if you think about it. However, they're talented, they'll be able to see lots of stuff. Europe will quickly catch up. So I think of it as a natural trend. Korean game companies, all the big Korean companies are all talking about Web3. Whether it's Krafton, the people behind PUBG, whether it's Nexon, whether it's Netmarble, Square Enix, right? Gumi, right?
Ubisoft.
Yeah, exactly. All the big Asian companies are all embracing the space, right? So, but there's an additional dynamic, which is the opportunity. Normally, when it comes to tech advances, gaming included, it's a war between the US and China.
Yeah.
Right? So China normally, through Tencent, is a dominant gaming player. US with all of their players, Activision, whatever. But in the US, those players have been quasi-disqualified for the time being because of the audiences, which is a different kind of dilemma. And because of what's happening in China, none of the big Chinese incumbents can enter that space, which is actually a great time for new players to enter in this market. And we see this today. Vietnam has a GameFi revolution that's going on, for instance. I mean, this idea that Philippines and Vietnam would actually receive foreign overseas investments at unicorn valuations for gaming companies would have been, again, unthinkable, right?
Right.
So this sort of really I think, creates a different flow of opportunity that is available for anyone who enters the Web3 gaming space.
And I think maybe just kind of close off on the point, I think that when you think of gaming more broadly than just gaming, you think of gaming as a social media, really.
Yes.
Most games now are multiplayer games. You're going there to socialize.
Yeah.
I think when you see it in that context, digital property rights, owning things become much more relevant, right? Represent how you represent yourself, your avatar, your wearables. There's a much less resistance, for example, in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
Almost zero resistance, actually.
Yeah.
They're all piling in.
Yep.
And they're piling in often in the context of gaming, but they're thinking about it in a different way.
Well, keep in mind that...
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
we'll come back into. I think there's a lot that we can pull apart in this, but I think one of the things that we want to touch on, right, is the Web3 gaming space, still in its infancy, has already been through several pretty substantial narrative shifts. We've seen some breakout success in terms of adoption near the end of last year, and I think one of the big kind of waves that certainly was an enormous tool for bootstrapping player liquidity and bringing new users in, was financial incentives. And they still play a big role in the current gaming space, whether that be through the guise of earning fungible tokens or owning assets and digital property rights. But my question here is probably the biggest kind of collapses or at least projects that have really kind of ground to a halt where they've seen kind of either this hyperinflation in their game token or we've seen real challenges in scalability. I want to put to all of you here, is there a place for these financial incentives in Web3 gaming in the long-term time horizon? And how do we balance this with scalability whilst remaining and keeping some of these incentives in place? Seb, why don't you kick things off?
I can start. So basically, I was saying, keep in mind that we haven't found what's the exact successful model into Web3 gaming. There's still a lot of experimentation going on, and some of the experimentation have been going viral faster than others thanks to the network effect because of token ownership and because of financial incentive. We have So the industry in general is launching various mechanics, testing on, seeing what takes, what doesn't take, and we're seeing on a day-to-day like new games come up, like new elements like Steppen appeared suddenly, metaverse now on one way. On the long run, like you have to run both like a great product that is fun and has all the core mechanic of like a core loop, a meta gameplay that keep people entertained with live ops and retention. On the other side, now you need to manage a treasury and then a whole economy beside. Game designers are not necessarily economists, so they are learning. And ultimately, yes, it cannot be a zero-sum game regarding the token incentive. So you have to think the token economics with like the ability of having external influx of token that doesn't come only from the same community or the growth of user to be sustainable on the long term. That means like it's much better to think from the approach of like game as a platform more than game as like destination, final destination for themselves.
So one thing also to add to that is that I think thinking of terms of financial incentives has a little bit sort of obscured the actual narrative of what Web3 gaming is, because really what Web3 gaming does is it opens up the financial system of the game. It doesn't necessarily, the financial incentive comes from the fact that the game therefore becomes capitalist.
Yes.
Right? Which means that people can participate in a manner that could be incentives, but doesn't have to be. So for instance, what happened with Axie and with now what they call play and earn, it came from ownership. It wasn't that the game was designed to be a play and earn or play to earn game. It was that the fact that you had property ownership that then allowed a third party like YGG to come in and basically create a yield system. But again, it had nothing to do with Axie in and of itself. It had something to do with a third party that then created a capitalist incentive to bring that to the system. One of the classic things that gamers in the West would argue about, I don't want my game to be heavily financified.
Right.
Except that you're already being heavily financified. You just don't know, right?
Yeah.
You don't know, for instance, that this industry makes $200 billion off your time. You also don't know that roughly 70% of that value goes straight into the ad networks, like Google and Apple and Facebook, for instance, of which that, and then on top of that, 30% of whatever gross they make then goes into the platform as distribution fees. Which
You're being passively monetized in this
exactly,
versus
right, exactly. And so because they don't know this, they think, oh, this is no big deal. But when you open up a financial system, when the transparency comes around and when you see, wait, where does all the value go, it allows for third-party intermediaries to come in and say, I can make this more efficient. So for instance, this trend that we're seeing where people are basically giving free NFTs as a way to attract users to play a game, really what they're doing is they're basically turning the advertising model upside down.
Yeah.
Because in the classic advertising model, I would spend $50 to $100 maybe per user or something like that per paid user to Apple and Facebook, right? How much of that money, which by the way, this year is forecasted to be over $110 billion in app installs, right? How much of that money finds its way back to the gaming industry? Close to zero,
yeah.
Right? They don't invest in games, they don't give back to the players don't get sort of, free credit for, basically spending lots of time on the App Store, right? None of that. So it's the most highly extractive tax that is out there. But when you give out NFTs for free, maybe some of them sell, but how much of the money that the player receives might come back into the ecosystem, or maybe even more, which is what we've seen with things like Phantom Galaxies. And that's the revolution. So we're taking the value of an ecosystem that is worth 200 billion and growing, and redistributing the value appropriately to the players in the ecosystem in a much more healthy fashion. That's a narrative for Web3 gaming, but because there's money involved, and because financial awareness and financial knowledge across most of the world, which includes gamers, because gamers represent most people on the internet, is low. Right? And so they don't understand how financial systems work. They don't have portfolios. They don't understand anything about yield. So for them, this whole just becomes strange and funny and might feel like a Ponzi scheme when there is already inherent value in the ecosystem.
Well, Jamie, you mentioned earlier, right, like a lot of people don't necessarily want kind of, in the traditional gaming spaces, at least some foundedness to the fact that people don't want to financialize gaming. So I guess
I don't think they don't want it, it's just a resistance to it, right? Because as you said, they don't necessarily understand that that's already happening. It's obfuscated at an industry level.
Intentionally obfuscated.
Of course, right,
yes.
And look, the reality is designing game economies is not new. It's been around for as long as gaming's been around. The difference now is that we are designing token economies, economic systems, in a totally permissionless environment. It's totally free market fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. And that's not been battle tested, it's an experiment. So we've got a token design team, we'll work with 200 startups this year. The large majority of those we'll work on designing a token economy with. For most founders, that is an entirely new concept. what do you mean I've got to understand the basics of economics? Look at how well economists forecast what's happening in the macro environment. Not very well. So how the hell do you expect a founder to be able to design the perfect digital economy? It's not going to happen. The point is it will happen through experimentation. The problem is that, and Seb, you alluded to it earlier, which I agree with, when something's a success, the media attention wraps around it because number goes up, and then number goes up more because of the attention. And then it can fundamentally break that system. The economic load that system handles, it's too immature to kind of handle. And then, of course, you get a collapse. And the collapse is bigger because of the attention it got. And so it's this really perverse system. And by the way, that's not going to go away. But what's going to happen is through experimentation, we're going to learn. Hopefully the media attention evolves and matures, and we as an industry get better at articulating what is important and isn't important in that. But coming back to the main point, ultimately Web3 in any context is a financial revolution. It is about financial inclusion. And the key thing for me in the context of gaming is digital property rights. It's a cornerstone of building effectively capitalistic systems. And as we know, capitalist systems have their pros and their cons, but they're generally net positive.
Yeah, and I think to add, sort of, with digital property rights, you actually then have digital freedom, right? The ability to freedom to transact, and for third parties to sort of affect these network effects.
They have sovereignty.
Exactly, they have sovereignty. And I think for gamers inherently, actually, they do want that, but they don't necessarily understand it. In the same sense that they don't fully understand how the democratic process works either. It ought to work, right? But actually understanding the intricacies around it is something that most people don't get. But just to add on one point about sort of not having been battle tested, the reason why sort of let's call it financial systems and gaming systems have been battle tested because they were always resisted by the incumbents. If you remember gold in World of Warcraft, for instance, or skin trading with Valve, right? These were becoming billion-dollar businesses, and what happened? They're like, we don't like that. They shut it down. They take away the rights and just evaporate a business, which, really, if you think about it, about 15, 20 years ago was beginning to really pick up momentum, right? And even today, you can find a black market. Just go to eBay and look for basically accounts, and you can see people are selling their PUBG accounts, Apex accounts, basically Fortnite skins, right? They're all doing this already today, except they're doing it in sort of a black market style.
Yeah.
All this will do is open it up in a manner where now we can really battle test it in a free manner and actually experiment. And there's a lot of economic history that we can fall back on as to what property rights has done in the physical world that we can basically look to build on in the digital version.
And look, I would just say, like, the problem statement for me that I think we're trying to optimize for in the context of gaming is that there is billions of dollars of digital wealth that might be the primary form of wealth for whole generations that is not currently recognized by the existing financial system. You can't go into a bank and say, shit, I need a short-term loan, or I need to be able to pay off my tuition fees or whatever it is, and I have this thing as collateral. That's not possible. You'll be laughed out the bank.
Yeah.
And so for me, if we can integrate that wealth, we can create a system that recognizes that wealth as collateral, as value, where they can borrow and lend against it, then you have true financial inclusion. That's the North Star for me in the context of Web3 gaming.
Maybe one thing, like we put a lot of focus around like the financial aspect of gaming, but to me, like what also Web3 brings through digital ownership is like the notion like players, like they own a wallet, and you want those players to be able to cross across multiple games, to track their history on-chain through all the digital belonging they have, their wearable, their equipment, their achievement across many games, and you want them to build like that value over time, like their reputation. That reputation can serve indeed like to take loan, to financial, to involve like finance, reputation, system, loans, etc. For on those aspects, but much more like it can truly revolutionize user acquisition. It can revolutionize as well like the idea of like building an industry that's no longer fragmented over like just 2 or 3 distribution platforms, but each player, each community itself become the new way to onboard users, a new way to carry the value across and more. And that's something that's not been enough yet utilized, I think, by the video game industry, that the metaverse is touching upon with interoperability standards, but it's beyond the metaverse, actually. Like avatars and interoperability is one topic. Like there's much more potential behind. And I would highly engage the gaming industry to look at this more, essentially, than just the financial incentive.
Maybe just to add, because the open permissionless nature is actually great for customer acquisition, which is where, again, the majority of gaming profits goes to, which is UA.
Yeah.
And for indies, that's one of the reasons why indies are dying in basically the traditional gaming industry, because they can't afford it anymore. So that's actually great for them. The ones who resist it are the incumbents, because they have a formula in which they can make money through the walled gardens. They don't want to share their customers, right? And I think this is basically where, when you think about Steam, for instance, banning it, for instance, as an example, one hand you could say, oh, it's the straw man it's a scam, but actually, really, it's very much about protecting their walled garden.
100%. So I think with about 5-6 minutes left, what I want to kind of turn the screw a little bit on this, especially around, because I think for a lot of builders in the space and those running games, user acquisition is front of mind, and we have like some big hurdles. And I think touching on kind of the piece that you mentioned there, Seb, around metaverse in particular and open metaverses and how we start to kind of remove some of these barriers that exist. The wallet certainly feels like a bit of a big sticking point today for onboarding like some of the traditional gamers that aren't already in Web3. But what I want to explore a little bit is like how much, we've talked a lot about kind of platforms and kind of different forms of technology. One thing I don't hear enough about is the hardware and the role of hardware in this. When we look at like all of the various stages of different evolutions in the gaming industry, we saw the introduction of obviously console gaming, all the way through to the smartphone, and all of a sudden the kind of mobile gaming industry popped up. Is hardware going to be kind of the big unlock here, or like for kind of the mass adoption that we look at?
So what we've seen, maybe I can jump in, like every new console launch has typically enlarged the gaming market by attracting new audience, because it essentially enables new gameplay, like touchscreen, like a controller, haptics, 3D, VR, and so on. Hypercore. But at the end of the day, it's not about the hardware itself. It's about like how we bring creativity and innovation back. Yeah. And here, for the first time, we don't need to have a specific hardware to introduce new game mechanics, new ways to play, and attract new audiences. I believe like the blockchain technology and all the opening of both economic system, but ownership, governance, and many other aspects that we don't yet know about, but maybe will come up as we keep innovating, is the real revolution here that's become like, that unlock the creativity a lot.
I mean, I just want to build on that, because coming back to the title, right? How will Web3 revolutionize the gaming industry? We talked about the financial part. We talked about sovereignty and control. But actually, for me, one of the most exciting trends that we're seeing emerge through our accelerator now is how it can revolutionize the process of making games, the creative process of making games. And so if you look at innovations around generative art at the moment with AI, we're starting to see this convergence of technologies where very quickly we will be able to firstly register individual game assets on a universal kind of ledger of sorts, a universal library that can be reused. So if you create something once, why shouldn't somebody else be able to reuse it? People think about crypto and Web3 and DeFi in the context of composability, but composability is also true in terms of the creative production process. So you create something, it can be repurposed and reused. That's going to dramatically cut down the time to create both a game, AAA game, but also a movie. Increasingly, they're built in the same tools, the same gaming engines. Now, when you begin to combine that with generative AI, all of a sudden it can be AI that can reassemble and combine these things. And so, and when every output of that AI algorithm is, again, an NFT, a digital asset, all of a sudden we're going to have this Cambrian explosion of creative innovation where the kind of ability to produce AAA game grade content is going to be massively democratized. And so outside of gaming, if you look at things like Netflix or Disney Plus, I don't know about you, I've got a young daughter, I'm constantly going in there and trying to find something new. It is impossible for the current production process.
Is Peppa Pig not enough?
No, not for me.
No, yeah.
But it's impossible for the existing kind of industrial-based production process to keep up with the demand of streaming. The same is going to be true with gaming. And I believe this convergence of technologies, which is going to be enabled by digital assets, is going to power that.
I think to add, there is, in our portfolio, over 100 of them are gaming companies.
Yeah.
And I think everyone will recognize that to make a good quality game that people want to really play for fun takes some time to make, right? It's not something that you can just do in 3 to 6 months that feels more like a DeFi protocol wrapped in some kind of gaming element, right? I mean, Sandbox really began its mission to build the Sandbox as it is today in 2018, right? It has what it has today, not because of what they did 6 months ago, but because of the work that began literally 4 years ago. So much of the gaming investment really began in 2021, in terms of where all the other VCs came in as well, right? This particular year, close to $3 billion plus basically went into Web3 gaming, which is a tremendous amount of money.
It's huge,
right? And many of the people who have entered the space in now are people who have built triple A games basically in previous sort of lives, right? So this will eventually evolve into, we think, in the next 12 to 18 months, into sort of this incredible wave of extremely high quality games. And what we've now seen also is that the people who want to play these games actually don't care about being on the platform. Right? If you take a look at Axie, they don't need to, they sideload. They don't need to use Google Play, for instance, right? If you think about our own experience with Phantom Galaxies or with Sandbox, right? It doesn't need to be on Steam. I'll download it directly on the website, right? So this sort of vision of decentralizing the space where really the consumer and the ownership of the assets becomes the center of the experience actually is a way in which we remove our dependency on the platforms. It's better for the consumer. And that's why we also think that hundreds of millions of users in the gaming world will onboard in the near term, as in, say, 18, 24 months, because of all of this great content that will come out in the midterm.
Well, I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in the gaming space. We are unfortunately out of time today. Thank you for all of the great discussion we've had, and I'm sure many of us will be hanging around today if anyone has any questions. Thanks, everyone.